Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Welsh. Thank you so much for joining us here. We are back for another Friday edition of News Flash here today. We are starting off today's show by talking a little bit about critical race theory. We're going to break down why it is an interesting topic of discussion, if not as an important one as many people would have you believe. Meanwhile, I'm trying to give you a little bit of a nuanced take in it. Meanwhile, what is kind of really actually scary is all these bills being passed limiting discussion of certain topics in America's classrooms. Meanwhile, Joe Biden's bipartisan infrastructure deal may not be doing so well for him. We will fill you in. Corporate media is camouflaging the corporate court. How the Supreme Court has some pretty blatantly awful pro-corporate rulings that were pretty much swept under the rug by the corporate media, and a great interview from India Walton with Michelle Goldberg in the New York Times, or a little discussion, I guess you could say, that we will go through, where she says some interesting stuff about defund the police. We'll get into it. But first, I do want to get right into it today by checking out this guy, the crusader of critical race theory, Joy Reid, talking to Christopher Rufo is the critical race theory crusader, talking here to Joy Reid about various topics. Many of them you got to assume are going to have to do with critical race theory. So don't want to waste any time here. We have a big show for you today. So let's get right into it.
You say that Ibram Kendi, Dr. Ibram Kendi, who's a college professor, you call him the guru of critical race theory. So we reached out to him. I've interviewed him before. So we reached out.
Yeah. So this is obviously, not true. He's definitely trying to distort a lot of things here. Christopher Rufo is with this. Just for many people have a lot of kind of hysteria about this, but critical race theory, I think the best way of putting it, probably the most accurate way of putting it from, a left-wing perspective, I guess, is what you could say. It's a kind of obscure theory, mostly taught in law schools. It was a way of examining the relationship of race in our society. I would argue it takes things from a kind of a race reductionist perspective, a race-first perspective that isn't always accurate, if not an incredibly, it is obviously race plays an incredibly important role in our society, but I wouldn't agree that it plays the most important role in our society. And you get in terms with, kind of white privilege, things like that, and it kind of gets all down from there. Where do you draw the line? That's a question that a lot of people who have, both racial and class-based analyses, disagree on and debate on. But critical race theory is very obscure. But what it has been used by Republicans, I think, probably smartly, is to tap into the ever-present, ever-utilizable white resentment that is so apparent, and it's really always a factor in America. The kind of fear that, we're being made to be demonized. We're the victims. We're the people who are under attack. Like, woe is me. Like, we have to. That is so much of not just this debate, but conservatism at large, and it really always has been.
Out to him because you say he's the guru of critical race theory. You name him a lot in a lot of your
point one for Joy Reid.
Manifesto or your
Kendi
your
is not a
memo,
criminal race
theorist.
Video. That's he's not.
We reached
the best,
out to him.
But
We asked him. We asked him if he's a critical race theorist. He said, "I admire critical race theory, but I don't identify as a critical race theorist. I'm not a legal scholar, so I wasn't trained on critical race theory. I'm a historian." And Chris would know this if he actually read my work or understood that critical race theory is taught in law schools. I didn't attend law school, which is where critical race theory is taught. It's really the only place it's taught. NBC has looked into everywhere, and it's not taught in elementary school. But hold on a second. This is the second thing he said, which is strange to me that you.
Let me respond.
This
is not a monologue. This should be a dialogue, right? Am I right?
It's my show, so it's how I want to do it. So let me read you one more quote from him, because you've made a lot of claims about critical race theory saying that white Americans are inherently racist, that racism is inherent to whiteness. And that is one of the core charges that you're making about, these sort of what you consider like sort of woke studies in school. This is what Ibram Kendi has said in his own words. He said, "We've been taught that racist is essential to who a person is. It's a fixed category. It's in someone's heart. That's one of the reasons why people are unwilling to or unable to admit the times in which they're being racist, because it's not just admitting I was being racist in that moment. Basically, we're tattooing racist on our forehead for the rest of our lives."
All right, so this here does not make any sense. What she's saying is And both what Kendi is saying, there's like the blatant contradiction here right in the middle of this argument. So pretty much what she's saying is, oh, you accuse critical race theorists of saying that, to be white is to be racist. You can't get the racism away from you. It's like kind of an endemic part of who you are, and there's nothing really you can do to change that. Like you're racist forever, forget about it, But then she goes to the Kendi quote, which says, "We've been taught that racist is essential to who a person is. It's a fixed category. It's in someone's heart. That's one of the reasons why people are unwilling or unable to admit." So pretty much he's saying, we've been taught that, but who's saying that? Who's teaching that? It's you. It's you, dude. Like what is I'm not getting the connection here. What they're actually trying to say. Like, is it true? And from what I understand of Ibram Kendi's work, Joy Reid's work, and I think this is not entirely true with all critical race theorists. Like Kimberly Crenshaw. I mean, I'm not sure she would entirely say this. Like, there's different, obviously, there's different takes on this, even within the kind of critical race theory or race studies, I guess you could call it, community, about racism and all that kind of stuff. But I generally tend to think there's a correlation between how much of a grifter you are, how much of a person you're just trying to sell books and get on TV shows. I think the more you're trying to do that, the more likely you're to say, oh, it's just, you have to keep coming back to me. You have to keep buying my books so that you're not racist, because to be white is to be racist. You need to read my books to learn how to not be racist. Don't you want to learn how to not be racist? I mean, that's a grift that works. It worked really well last year, but it's not going to work forever. And I think it really is destructive to, healing and unity and, coming together around other goals, other aims.
Isn't that the opposite of
like making people's lives better?
What you're arguing?
Well, I'll say two things. First of all, it's very interesting to me that so many people are now running away from the race of the label of critical race theory. But
he's not a critical race theorist.
Hold on.
Well, I think that's another thing. He's trying to stick it on everyone where I would argue does not belong.
I'm going to quote two critical race theorists. Barbara Applebaum with the book Being Good, Being White. She says, quote, "All white people are racist." Robin DiAngelo, who's another critical whiteness studies scholar, says that, quote,
nope.
Yeah, he called her a critical race theorist before, and then she's like, "Oh, she's a white studies scholar." Like, whatever. Like, this is just so stupid. Like, language, and both sides look stupid, I think, by engaging it. Be like, "Oh, well, you're a critical whiteness scholar. Oh no, you're a critical race theorist." Oh, blah blah blah. Like, that is just so not where we need to be.
White identity is inherently racist. So what you're doing is you're playing a series of word games. You know that critical whiteness studies is a subfield of critical race theory?
No, it's not.
These things are all deeply interrelated.
No, they're not.
And I'm not going to let you play word games. And this is really, I think, the most essential thing.
Hold on. No.
Let me respond at least once. I haven't gotten a full sentence out.
Because I'm not going to let you see. One of the things that, and I don't know, you probably never watched me on TV. Just we didn't know who each other were, not so long ago. But I don't allow people to just make up and say lies on the show. It's just not really right to do that and let people hear. But hold on. Robin DiAngelo. Wait.
Am I right
Robin
or wrong?
DiAngelo is not a critical race theorist, and I want everyone to know that. I don't know who the other woman is, but she's not. But let's just go through a minute, because whiteness, and racist. Whiteness and racist.
Sure.
Where did the term whiteness come from?
Sure, and I think this is an important point, and I hope you let me actually get a full paragraph out about this.
Go for it.
Whiteness is the idea that there is some kind of metaphysical category in the world, that all white people are reducible to this essence of whiteness. Then what happens is that they load all of these negative connotations. They say that whiteness is, by definition, that includes white fragility, includes white privilege, includes internalized white superiority. And then what they do is they try to impose these reductive racial categories onto individuals. And I actually agree with Kendi's approach. I think that we should fight race essentialism. But the problem is that critical race theory enshrines race essentialism.
But you see
it in schools. And I'll give you three examples of critical race theory being taught in schools.
Hold on 1 second.
This is exactly how this like whole stupid like word game, like already their definitions, they both contradicted each other multiple times on who believes what. Like, does Kendi believe that all white people are racist or not? I don't know. I don't think any of them know, which makes this whole conversation already so stupid.
In Cupertino, California.
These are in your talking points, sir. Chris, these are in your talking points, and I know what you're going to say because you said it with Mark Lamont Hill. You repeat these same things. They're in this manifesto. People can read it online. Let me just go for a second. On the subject of whiteness, are you aware, since you say that I guess you're sort of a quasi-historian in your thinking, that whiteness was actually formed in the United States? That whiteness didn't even exist as a thing. Europeans were all European. They considered themselves Italian or Polish or whatever. When the colonists came here, they actually created the idea of whiteness. This is from the Smithsonian.
I agree with
as
that.
a way to distinguish themselves from what they call the savages, the natives, and from black people, from Africans, who even if you had a little African in you, if you're Plessy, who's 7/8 white, if you are African in any aspect, that you are reduced of rights. So people that you don't like, that are doing this sort of wokeness training, are saying whiteness has always had power. There used to be a saying, I'm free, white, and 18. It was commonly said in the 50s and 60s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. So whiteness has power. So people who want to decouple whiteness from power, that's what you're annoyed by, right? Let me play a little bit of what you said. You did a speech. Hold on. You did a speech at the Claremont Institute in which you talked a little bit about how you really feel about the.
Again, so first of all, it's kind of seems like you just had him on here to just yell at him, which is one thing, but it would be nice to. It's one thing as in and of itself, but it would be nice to see him get a little bit of breathing room here.
Academics of it. Here it is. This is cut. I think this is.
What does this guy ever get to
is
tell?
it 3? Yeah, go for it. Play it.
I'm a white guy fighting critical race theory.
Do you identify as white?
I mean, I'm an Italian American, so you tell me. Lumping people into white, black, Asian, as you suggested, is such a crude and broad categorization.
There's these very kind of pathetic and very angry graduate students that try to fight me on these highly technical Hegel interpretations, and it's like, I don't have time for this. I don't give a about this stuff.
So you don't give an S about this stuff. You're really just having a campaign to take everything that annoys white Americans and white conservatives.
No,
Hold
that's
on.
not right.
You
No.
want to make a campaign and stuff everything
you
in
played
there
my
that
highlight
people
reel. You played my highlight reel. Give me a chance to respond.
And you
no,
want
that's
to
absolutely
stuff
wrong.
it all into critical race theory, right?
What I don't think is right is that forcing 8-year-olds in Cupertino, California, to deconstruct their racial identities and then rank themselves according to power and privilege. It's intersectionality theory, which was invented by Kimberly Crenshaw.
It's a separate thing.
Which is part
Intersectionality
of
is a
critical
separate
race
thing.
theory.
No, it's not.
Oh
You
my
have
god!
her on
Again,
his-
this is just so stupid. Like, why does this matter? Okay, I can't take in much more of this. Like, we're on a very short rope with this already. Already we are seeing just this back and forth about just this racial, I'm gonna say it, bullshit. It's just, you can say all this. It's a certain the biggest thing right off the bat here is we are seeing this. And I don't know, because I honestly have not studied the in-depth work of someone like Ibram X. Kendi or Kimberly Crenshaw or all the, very, no-name academics that have been put into the culture war blender nowadays in a very weird way and weird turn of events. I don't know exactly, what their works are, but I generally tend to think that there is a whole host of this stuff that goes overboard, and as I'm familiar with Ibram Kendi's work, one of the biggest things he says is how to be an anti-racist, not being colorblind, not trying to say, well, because again, there's the whole thing. Each of these situations have nuances, because you can be colorblind and not respect other cultures, not give other cultures the time of day and let them coexist. But then there's also a certain thing of tying a certain culture to an overly inherent negative connotations, and not really include in your rhetoric and your interpretation and what you say to people that yes, there is change. What I think is the biggest problem is the phrase and the idea and the kind of school of thought, that racism is endemic to the American DNA. Nothing can be done to change it. There's no way of fixing or making our society better, making our society less racist through kind of eliminating some material conditions that have been troubling folks of all races that are in a lower economic class. That is not something that should be even in the equation, because, well, if racism is just there, if racism is just a big problem that we can't solve, it's insurmountable, it's part of life, it's part of American history, then what's the point of doing anything? Why can't you just sit down and just like let nothing change. And that is, let nothing change is one of the fundamental core tenets of the liberal ideology that is so pervasive in our society. But this is just dumb. Like, he's just debating, that's a critical race theory. Cupertino. Like, Joy Reid is not getting a gotcha on saying, this is not critical race theory, this is critical white studies. Like, it's clear that he has a problem with both of it, all of it. And again, this kind of smart politics is not going around and like yelling at people, sassing people, interrupting people, being snarky and sardonic to people. So as these people love to say, it's about the politics of addition, not the politics of subtraction. I think Joy Reid is violating it here. Let's go for one more dose here.
Show, you know this.
Yeah, she invented
here's
both
the bottom
things.
Line, Joy.
She invented
what you've
both
done
things.
in tonight's segment is exactly what I'm fighting against. I'm fighting against the manipulation of language. I'm fighting against language
You're fighting against wokeness, and you don't like corporate wokeness, et cetera. I get it.
Euphemistic terms with subversive content. Because otherwise, you just say whatever you want, and then you back away from it, and you dance around it. It's not going to happen. Parents all over this country, they know what's happening in schools. They know what's happening in their public institutions.
By the way, I must say, Mark Lamont Hill did a much better job with this guy. Anyway, let's move on now. And I do want to talk about a very interesting story. This is bills banning critical race theory all over the classroom. This is from U.S. News. Dozens of Republican-backed bills banning the teaching of divisive topics on race and inequality are piling up in Congress and state houses across the country. Even as a survey of new high school students shows that many of them never learn about such issues in classrooms anyway. Just over half, or 56% of students surveyed, report that they had opportunities to discuss race and racism, sometimes a great deal in school, according to a report from the nonpartisan America's Promise Alliance, an education organization that partnered with its research arm. Only 3 in 5 students reported their school curriculum represented non-white communities sometimes or a great deal. And again, this is not about critical race theory. It's just about the simple ability to discuss race and racism in class, which, like, I don't care where you are in the political spectrum. If you don't believe that kids should be able to discuss race and racism in class, you're an authoritarian, psycho. It's just ridiculous. There's no getting around that. And the extent of those experienced varied wildly. Black students reported a small but statistically significant higher rate of opportunities to discuss race and racism compared to white students. In addition, fewer students of color report their curriculum represented specific racial ethnic backgrounds compared to white students. So, of course, the culture war touched off 2 years ago with the 1619 Project, and it took up from there. Now more than ever, we need policies that bring us together, not rip us apart, Republican Governor Kevin Stitt of Oklahoma said upon signing the bill into law in May that would prohibit the teaching that people consciously or unconsciously are inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive. And yeah, that's, again, this, I personally, as someone who, shocker to some people on the right wing, actually believe in, free speech, free expression, free debate. I believe that these discussions should be allowed to happen. But I do think it is probably for the better that, individuals, I would say, are. I don't believe that, again, that individuals are wake up one day and all of a sudden, they're racist. It's material conditions. It's it's institutions that make them believe that. And yes, the institutions are the ones that are racist. They're the ones that perpetuate behavior on, I think, an individual level. And I think it's very, very important that we as people on the left draw that line clearly because it makes sense to more people. So the GOP-controlled legislature in Tennessee passed one of the most sweeping laws banning educators from discussing racism, sexism, bias, and other social issues with students. Again, discussing racism, sexism, bias, social issues, all that stuff cannot be discussed in the classroom anymore. What does that set kids up for going out into the real world, dealing with people, and actually creating a more healthy society? Where that, if this kind of stuff could not be discussed, how is... that should just not be okay by any standard. But this is what it's really about. It's like so much of what the right does. It's projection. It's, the freakouts, the people the blood that has been spilled, literally, over the fear that the left wing is erasing the history of America by taking down Confederate statues. How does that look now? when we see all these Republican states trying to pass laws, literally changing history curriculums, rewriting history in schools to talk about how America is good, socialists are terrorists, and the slaves, they didn't have it that bad. Like, that is just exactly what we are seeing right now in Florida, for example, Tennessee, Pennsylvania, another one. Florida State Board of Education passed its brand of restrictions on critical race theory and other issues concerning U.S. history and civics, which the governors said would prevent educators from teaching kids to hate their country. Again, I went to a school that I would say, is largely a pretty progressive school. It's not one of those, it didn't teach me critical race theory because elementary schools and high schools and even high schools don't teach critical race theory, but it did teach me some of the bad things that our country has done, but most of them I kind of found out on my own through like reading and watching videos and stuff like that. But it's something that I think schools should teach the truth, and that truth requires a lot of bad crap our country has done over the years. That comes in slavery, that comes with what we did with suppressing black people at home, the movements that we did here and abroad. Like, hidden history is all that stuff. None of it I learned in school. I found that out through other sources. And the fact that kids are not going to be able to learn that stuff in a lot of other countries, like, that is the real authoritarianism. That is the real, George Orwell, 1984. That is happening right in these classrooms. People are, the history is being rewritten and is for real this time. So I think anyone who, pretended to get mad about history because the Confederate flags or statues were being taken down, now I think you got a cause to worry about. But I don't expect to see any of those people getting mad, because in the end, by protecting Confederate statues and going after things like quote-unquote critical race theory in schools, they are fighting for the same goals, which is the continued idea that, old white America is good white America and nobody else can question it. Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Spencer Walsh Radio Network, and let me tell you about our lineup. Newsflash is all new Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays now. And that is, of course, our flagship show. But we have plenty of other great offerings for you, including Uncultured live mixes every Saturday. Perfect way to celebrate or get ready for the Saturday night. Have a good time. Tune in to the Spencer Walsh Radio Network for live broadcasts. And Hidden History is every Thursday now on the Spencer Walsh Radio Network. We got a banger new episode coming for you around midday or so tomorrow. So you have that to look forward to. Please support us. Listen to our podcast wherever. But when you do, please be sure to rate and review us, because that does help get the word out there. I'm sure you know the drill if you listen to podcasts. You know what to do. It's the Spencer Walsh Radio Network. Thanks so much for listening. Yeah, you got to hop in that helicopter because we are taking a hidden history trip to Chile. Don't worry, I won't throw you out. But on that ride, you'll learn a lot about the Allende coup and how Augusto Pinochet came to power with the support of the U.S. as well. So, yeah, new hidden history out now. So thank you so much for coming on and joining us here today on Newsflash. It was the type of I told you so moment Joe Biden lives for. Natasha Kracky and Laura Barron Lopez here in Politico. Standing before the media on Thursday, the president basked in the limelight of a bipartisan infrastructure deal. It wasn't just the specifics of the package that had him revved up, it was the way it had come together. The longtime creature of the Senate, who boasted endlessly about his mastery of the art of compromise, now had proof the seemingly antiquated form of governance could work. This is like the whole primary. People write off Biden, and they've done it for a long time now, but the guy keeps on winning, says Greg Schultz, Biden former campaign manager, with a nice little under-the-table blowy there. Very nice. That part's it's personal for Biden. He's always believed that, yeah, it's broken, but it doesn't have to stay broken. It validates his brand of politics, his style of operating in D.C. That is, again, that's one of the reasons why I hated Biden so much during the primary, and for the most part still think he is really wrong on, is just this really insidious cesspool-style swamp of politics that all compromise is created equal, all bipartisanship is good. When you have the corporate class completely owning Washington, D.C., when the way it is the swamp that it is, so many politicians are oriented around the swamp. So many politicians are oriented around, keeping that gravy train running, keep Washington running as uninterrupted as humanly possible, then you're going to get a lot of really bad compromises that don't help working people, that both Democrats and Republicans agree on. Because when it comes to stuff like that, they are on the same team. Their function in the end is to keep things going, keep the status quo going, just give people enough that they need to survive, and that's it. So that they don't, make sure that the water's still coming out of the tap. People can still go to the store. People can still go to their, fast food restaurants, get their fix. Make sure that being an American is just worth it for the time being, so that real mass action doesn't materialize. That is really what most compromises are designed to do. That is why I am very skeptical of bipartisanship and this Biden agenda. And that does not change with the infrastructure bill here. There was a lot of good stuff in this early infrastructure bill, but it really has been watered down for bipartisanship. Is that worth doing? Because, again, people, especially with the infrastructure bill, are going to see a huge amount of benefit from it. Should it be watered down for the sake of helping Republicans who want to see you fail and want to see you out of office? Again, people don't care about infrastructure being bipartisan. They don't really care about anything being bipartisan. They just want it done. If one party or two parties or three parties or four parties is going to make people's lives better, they don't care who does it. They just want it done. In call after call with Democratic leaders, White House counselor Steve Ricchetti, one of the president's closest and most trusted aides, stressed the bipartisan deal would prove to be a political boon for the president, according to multiple Democratic sources with knowledge of the conversations. Again, people don't care about bipartisanship. They care if the deal is good. And if you water down the deal for the sake of bipartisanship, people are not going to like that. The genesis of Thursday's agreement started even before Biden officially announced the details of his $2 trillion infrastructure proposal in the spring. The White House wanted to lay the groundwork for a deal not only that attracted key centrist lawmakers, but could also get Republicans on board. Among the first visits of Biden aides were to Senator Lisa Murkowski, who gladly laid out her priorities. Among them was the need to help support the electric ferry market, with the same way with Senator Rob Portman of Ohio and dozens of other lawmakers with whom they met. Part of what drove the strategy was at a level of constituency. It was multi-track. People were cautioning. They weren't sure this was going to work. How can you thread the needle, Terrell said in an interview, of landing both a bipartisan deal with moving forward with a broader Democrat-only while moving forward with this broader Democrat-only spending bill, which, of course, they're still going to try and do. Biden has insisted, he's promised up and down, that he won't sign the bipartisan bill if the reconciliation bill that goes further is not right just behind, nipping at its heels. So how can you thread this needle, Terrell said in an interview, of landing both a bipartisan deal and moving forward on a broader Democrat-only spending plan? We're talking on the Hill to a wide variety of people. We were hearing it all. The next several months will be marked by a flurry of phone calls, in-person meetings, Zoom sessions, and Oval Office invitations at the White House lobbied lawmakers and wooed governors and mayors of the opposing party. So at the same time here, a bipartisan group of moderates continued to talk. A senior White House official said that it was never the case the president sought a bipartisan deal for the sake of bipartisanship. Rather, he was carrying out what he considered to be a mandate from Americans, to find common ground when he could. That was not your mandate. Your mandate was there. The reason why people gave you the win, clearly over Donald Trump, was to get stuff done, was to pass out your agenda. People, when they went to the polling booth, were like, oh, Biden said he wants a big, strong, bold infrastructure plan, but I'm voting for him not because I like that infrastructure plan, but because I want it to be watered down. No, that's not what it was. And that is, I think, a big, fundamental difference that tears up a lot of people in the Democratic Party, the Biden faction, and, the more left-wing, more aggressive faction. I guess we could call it that at this point. I wouldn't call much of the left aggressive, at least electeds right now. Several sources close to discussions said the White House was long interested in getting Republicans on board, even if it meant accepting a modest offer for them. White House negotiators knew before the initial talks even began the GOP would never agree to reversing the Trump tax cuts or hiking the corporate tax rate, but they pledged to be flexible. In an early meeting, Republicans offered up that as their red line, and Biden held up tax increases on those making less than $400,000 as his. The White House was ultimately unable to find a path forward, and the first attempt at a deal led by, again, Shelley Moore Capito. He's really being pushed to back away by some of the members of the left. Just go at it alone. Do that reconciliation bill. Get everything done in there. It didn't work with Shelley Moore Capito, but Biden just found another group of senators willing to negotiate. The bipartisan group that had always been willing to go higher in new spending than the Capito group, and that was led by Kristen Sinema and Rob Portman of Ohio. The group gradually came to a bipartisan framework that included close to $600 billion in new spending on roads, bridges, the internet, and other traditional infrastructure projects. By the time the White House negotiators left their meeting with senators on Wednesday night, they knew they had a deal. They just needed Biden to sign off on it, and he did with glee hours later. Though this still is no legislative language, and there remains much work to do in Congress to secure the votes, Biden supporters viewed Thursdays as a breakthrough and a political triumph. But hurdles remain. Liberal lawmakers in both chambers fear the passage of a bipartisan bill focused just on traditional reform result in a watered-down reconciliation package that's expected to include other priorities like elder and child care, climate change provisions, and money for higher education. Others are anxious the reconciliation package won't happen at all, as moderate Democrats buck the idea of voting on a $2 trillion plus bills. So it looks like Manchin's holding on to that, and Sinema's holding on to that for now. We will see. And then, of course, there's a whole other question of the filibuster, but we are watching that for sure. Cognizant of progressive concerns, Biden on Thursday offered his most explicit promise to date that he was committed to a reconciliation Democrat-only package that would pass in tandem with the bipartisan infrastructure bill. He said, quote, "I expect in the coming months this summer, before the fiscal year is over, we would have voted on this bill, the infrastructure bill, as well as worked on the budget resolution. But if this is the only thing that comes to me, I'm not signing it. It's in tandem." That commitment to a two-track strategy prompted Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell on Thursday night to question whether Republicans could end up supporting the infrastructure framework of several of his members had just crafted. But it also assuaged progressive lawmakers who were concerned about getting half a loaf. "It's the ultimate backstop," said Brian progressive lawmaker. He is not, whatever. But you have the speaker and the president saying that nothing is agreed to until everything is agreed to. And again, that includes that that includes the reconciliation package, which is going to go further. Bob Casey, likewise, said he was encouraged by Biden's assurance, and that is going to definitely be something we will keep an eye on. Now let's move to the Supreme Court. David Sirota in the Daily Poster writing, "The Supreme Court justices are being portrayed as moderate as they rig America's laws against workers and shareholders." It's kind of a very funny little dynamic that we're seeing here right off the bat, which is that, all of a sudden, the corporate media is not, or sudden this big scary 6-3 court, they're not doing that bad. Like they're voting on some pretty friendly bills. ACB, she's not that scary. She didn't vote to repeal Obamacare like everyone thought she would. She must not be that bad. But this is so this was in the New York Times. The arrival of Justice Amy Coney Barrett in October seemed to create a 6-3 conservative juggernaut that would transform the Supreme Court. Instead, judging by the 39 signed decisions in argued cases so far this term, including 2 major rulings on Thursday, the right side of the court is badly fractured, and its liberal members are having a surprisingly good run. This is a little bit of a misinterpretation here from the New York Times, because really what's happening, most court watchers say, is that John Roberts is really orchestrating this. He is, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, pretty big deal, but one of the biggest things he's doing is to make sure and to protect the legacy of the court by pretty much keeping it off the front pages, keeping it calm, not rocking the boat, making very narrow decisions, making very small stakes decisions, while throwing some bones to the liberals. That incentivizes them to stop this whole little court reform business that they've been talking about for years and years, and has seemed to have grown steam right around the time when Amy Coney Barrett was put in place. So that, of course, follows the spate of rulings that are on their face symbolic, but kind of designed to keep liberals happy. This, again, good run for the court's liberals. included a week that saw the High Court effectively legalize American corporations profit from child slavery abroad with Nestle, shield Wall Street firms from securities laws, and limit a key form of union organizing among the nation's poorest workers. So far in the term, the court has sided with the Chamber of Commerce, the major corporate lobby group in Washington, in 7 separate cases, and only divided the chamber in 2. This tracks with current court siding with the current court siding with the chamber 70% of the time overall, according to data compiled by the Constitutional Accountability Center. The Supreme Court's transformation to a corporate star chamber is rarely mentioned by an elite media, also owned by those same people, but it's a story the Daily Poster has been reporting on for a while. Business-related rulings are typically not framed by a liberal conservative continuum. In many cases, the block of putatively liberal justices are siding with corporations against workers, shareholders, and anyone else in society who doesn't have the willpower to stop them. Indeed, 2 of the 3 aforementioned cases this week, with the child slavery, the Goldman Sachs ruling that pretty much tossed out a class action lawsuit by institutional investors, like, for example, the Arkansas Teachers Retirement Fund, that they were knowingly selling them bad deals on investments. That class action lawsuit was thrown out, and of course the long-time law that allowed union organizers to go into California farms, that was also overturned. 8-1 were 2 of those rulings. Even the Times admitted that the court's 3 Democratic appointees have voted with the majority 73% of the time in divided cases, although the paper cast this as proof of jurisprudential moderation rather than a reflection of corporate capture or bipartisan conservatism. A good example of this bait and switch and how the analysis of corporate influence is written out of most of the legal coverage these days was the media portrayal of the recent Affordable Care Act as an alleged proof that the current court is moderate. That ruling, which let the ACA stand, was certainly a bit on the alternative, but the decision was a big win for corporate power, pretty much because it preserved a law that fortifies and subsidizes the private insurance industry. Corporate power was not being rocked by the continued upholding of Obamacare. So this is really what Roberts is trying to play. The game Roberts is trying to play here. Him and his fellow conservative justices and business interests that have been playing the long game to try and shield corporations from accountability are pretty happy with the way this corporate court is unfolding. All right, let's move now to Michelle Goldberg's column. On Tuesday night, this is again just how a socialist triumphed in Buffalo, in the New York Times here. On Tuesday night, just after the polls closed, Buffalo News ran an update about the city's mayoral primary, which pit 4-term incumbent mayor Byron Brown against the socialist India Walton. Those handicapping the race are not betting whether Brown will win, but by how much. Will a 10-point landslide suffice, or could he post a larger tally? You know the story from Wednesday. An hour and a half later, with all the votes in, Walton, a 38-year-old political newcomer, wasn't just ahead. She was ahead by a lot, 52-45. Buffalo, an overwhelmingly Democratic city, so there won't even be a Republican on the general election ballot, which is why Walton will almost certainly become the first socialist mayor in a major city of more than 50 years, although there is a police union-backed write-in campaign being whispered. We'll keep you posted on that, but so far hasn't amounted to much. And the first woman to lead Buffalo, where politics is such an old boys club that the city council is entirely male. She's a socialist, dyed-in-the-wool, DSA endorsed, Working Families Party endorsed, as hard as they come. And really has some great rhetoric about, we're the workers, we're the ones who do the work. Just talking about that, as we showed you, we played you all the clips back on the last episode. But Walton didn't upend expectations among local political observers. She complicated a narrative. She blew them up. She didn't just upend them, she blew them up. She also complicated a narrative that's set in since the 2020 election, that surging crime has made progressive politics toxic. This narrative was strengthened when Eric Adams, again, I'm telling you, pretty much, if he was a very strong outlier. I don't think he won because of crime. I think he won because he's the backing of a pretty powerful institutional machine in Brooklyn. He's a longtime Brooklyn borough president. Really did well with the outer boroughs and minority voters on a lot of different issues. This narrative was, again, he did run on quote unquote public safety. There's no denying that. A former cop, he came out ahead in the initial candidate of New York City's ranked choice mayoral primary. The Democrat, and he's not been quiet about it, how he thinks that he's the new face of the Democratic Party. Everyone needs to look like him, which is pretty much use identity politics, use populism in an incredibly cynical way to cover up for the fact that you were doing the bidding of the police unions and the real estate moguls that own New York City. So, polls reveal here that both black and white voters reject the slogan defund the police, yet Walton has shown that even in a city where shootings have surged a staggering 116% so far this year, a socialist promising police reform can win. When Goldberg asked her how, the ample answer was simple, and it goes back to the incredibly important, incredibly prescient thing that she said. Those closest to the problems are closest to the solutions. And talking to the people who experience the problems, and she was one of them. I mean, this woman had like 2 twins at the age of 14, was lugging medical equipment on a bus across town, studying to be a nurse at 19 or something like that. She's just an absolutely incredible story, with incredible policies to boot. But Walton is a working class woman who, with a working class background and inspiring personal story. The challenge of the left is that we use our jargony activist language and don't take time to fully explain what we mean to those who may not be as woke as we are. Finally, someone's saying it. Again, it should 1,000% be a national leader. 1,000%. Get her on TV all over the place, please. She shies away from the form of police reform. Very, very interesting. Despite the fact that she was leading protests for Black Lives Matter all over the city last year. She said, quote, "I come from the Marshall Gans School of Organizing," referring to the activist turned sociologist. "I try and avoid using negative language on campaigns. Instead of defund, we say we're going to reallocate funds. We're going to fully fund community centers. We're going to make the investments that naturally reduce crime, such as investments in education, infrastructure, and living wage jobs. Making people..." This is exactly how a real socialist talks about crime. Not this bullcrap that you hear from Christopher Russo or Joy Reid. This is how a real socialist talks about crime. Make material investments in people's lives. That is the best way to do it. Education, infrastructure, living wage jobs. This pays back 10 times over. Nothing stops crime better than a person who's gainfully employed. If you have to go to work, you don't have time to be out in the streets with all these shenanigans. Buffalo is a blue-collar city, and Walton, who grew up on the chronically neglected East Side, can relate to the problems of beleaguered fellow citizens. There are actually some pretty big similarities between her trajectory and Eric Adams. Both had hardscrabble backgrounds followed by struggles to master institutions that had frightened and alienated them. For Adams, it was the police department. For Walton, it was the medical establishment. She had her first child at 14 and gave birth to extremely premature twins at 19. Feeling ignored and disrespected in the newborn intensive care unit inspired her to become a nurse. "I wanted to go to a nursing school so that I could return to the NICU and be an example for another young mother who may be in a time of crisis similar to what I experienced." When she decided to run for office, her core support didn't come from the black working class. The early adopters were definitely white progressives, she said. She was embraced by national left-wing groups, including the Working Families Party, which sent people to help professionalize her campaign, and the DSA. It took more effort to make inroads with black working class voters. I did not necessarily cater to my base. I communicated with people that I thought were going to be the more difficult votes to get. So I went to churches, I went to the black community, a population that's traditionally averse to things like really progressive politics. In some ways, Walton epitomizes the winning formula for left-wing candidates. Today's left is basically a coalition between well-educated liberal professionals and working-class people of color. Often those best able to unite these groups are people of color with radical ideas and working-class ties. Bartender, AOC, Principal Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, also a nurse. Backlash politics may be gaining strength in America. Reactionary politics is another name for it. But that doesn't mean the left must retreat. Progressives are still far from a majority, but they can build power if they recruit people from communities they aspire to represent. Great, critical quotes here from India Walton, talking about how to build power, how to reach out to people, how to go after those votes that leftists have traditionally struggled to win. So critical and good for her once again. That's all the time we have for you guys today. We'll be back talking Tyler on Uncultured this Saturday. That's tomorrow, by the way.